and really going to go into just different knowledge, skills, and mindsets of the portrait specific to leading out PCBL work, right? So a portrait of a leader, of someone leading out PCBL work. That will be what we cover today. And I have to give a shout out. I don't know about if you guys noticed, but Arizona might be leading the chat with guests engaging with us today. So way to go, my AZ peeps. Yes, from Tucson to Yuma and Mesa, it's all covered. The whole state's covered here in this meeting today. So a little bit about the Portrait of a Leader. It was developed through, I went through very many different iteratives and gained and used lots of input and feedback from across our great nation from educators like yourselves. There are 12 lead for learner steering committee members that got together to kind of put this forth with the help and work with like Emily and Laura on the call from KnowledgeWorks. As a group, we let out 18 different focus groups to gather input and feedback from educators doing the work to really like drill in and say and see like what attributes, what skills, what mindsets does a leader need specifically to lead out learner-centered work, specifically to lead out PCBL work. For those of you that are living in that or stepping into it, I'm sure you're very much aware of how different the leader and leadership needs to be to get to that PCBL endeavor. So we used 18 different focus groups to gather information from educators across the states. We conducted more than 280 surveys. And then there were multiple iterations and reviewers and contributors once we consolidated that data. And when I say we, I mean the great team from KnowledgeWorks, specifically Kyle. Shout out to Kyle if he ever listens to this. He brought together all of this disaggregated data that many of us leading focus groups, and I'm sure you've been in focus groups, those conversations can go all types of different places. And Kyle disaggregated that data to narrow down into here are the main themes, attributes, and skills that are arising from these different conversations. And that's how we got the Portrait of a Leader. As we step into this, we're really going to define what the Portrait of a Leader is. And it's really a collective vision and dispositions of what it takes to lead and sustain student-centered systems. Lead and sustain is huge in this piece. Oftentimes, what happens when the strong leader leaves, the PCBL work may stop. And so really wanting to meet that need of how we can bring up emerging leaders and develop current leaders and get to where we can sustain and lead out PCBL work. So if you haven't seen them yet, I'm sure many of you have. Here is our Portrait of a Leader. And here are the top attributes and skill sets and mindsets that rose to the top as we went through the various focus groups and surveys and discussions and iterations with people from across the states. The two on the bookend, it's not necessarily continuum, but even though it's laid out like this, the two on the bookend were the top two attributes and skills, human-centered and transformational, identified from various stakeholders that individuals, leaders leading out this work should and would have. So human-centered was very important, and transformational was right there with it. Then we had authentic, collaborative, and advocate as important attributes, mindsets, and skills to lead out PCBL work. So this is our Portrait of a Leader. I'm going to kick it off to Bob. He's going to share, and we're going to live into the stories of how we are using the Portrait of a Leader in our work.
So I just wanted to briefly share, I've got two slides here for us that I'm going to focus specifically on before I turn it over to Casey. Our personalized learning journey here in Perry. My timeline starts in the winter of 2021, but I need to go back kind of even further than that. I've been here in this district since 2010. We've been very fortunate and blessed to have a lot of latitude as school leaders to be able to, to do some innovative things across the board, both elementary, middle, and high school. It probably starting around 2013, 2014, 2015, we started to identify a very common problem. And it's common to just about every middle school that I've worked with, as well as high school, and that's a student engagement issue. And so I started to have just individual conversations with teachers, very casual conversations that started to develop over time. And while I didn't realize what I was doing, I was actually conducting empathy studies with staff. I didn't know that was a thing until a few years ago, but that was kind of what we were doing. And using our return to school from COVID, we decided as a team that we were going to make some changes to try to solve our student engagement problems at Perry Middle School. And so we formed a research team, and that group of teachers, we started to look at how can we shift the way in which we teach kids? What instructional methods, what instructional pedagogies are best for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that will give us the most bang for our buck in terms of like really engaging them in the work of school. We looked at problem-based learning. We looked at project-based learning. We looked at connected learning. We looked at a wide variety of different instructional approaches. And we also went out and we looked at how some of these things were being implemented in different places. One of our journeys took us up to Wisconsin, where we were able to connect with one of their ESCs up there, which is doing a lot of work in authentic learning. That was able to visit the Waukesha STEM Academy as well as Kettle Moraine, some other schools up in that Milwaukee area that are really kind of moving this work forward. The result of our research was what we branded the Connected and Authentic Learning Academy at Perry Middle School. And so once we kind of got this up and running, we decided to dive into this and implement it kind of as a school within a school and see how this worked. We took the idea of connections, important connections between teachers and connections between teachers and students, and then connections between students and students, looking at the kind of the climate and culture work that our district had been doing with this idea of, hey, we need to provide students with authentic experiences along the way. It was roughly around the fall of 2022 that the state of Ohio kind of found their way into personalized learning. And that was the launch of the Ohio Personalized Learning Network. And so we decided in 2022 that we were going to participate in Ohio's launch. And then we eventually moved into Ohio's Transform model for personalized competency-based learning. So that's kind of where our timeline is. We are a member of the Ohio Personalized Learning Community, which is kind of the rebranded version of OPLN. But the next slide, and go ahead and click on that, is going to kind of take you through. And what I did here, I had an aha moment when I looked at each of these attributes of a portrait of a leader. And even though, the three of us, as well as others, were responsible for kind of putting those together, it really didn't dawn on me until I sat back and I tried to look at these attributes of leadership and how these kind of played out throughout our journey. And so, you could kind of look at this, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, but that human-centered piece was a very important part for us to start with. The empathy studies that were conducted, and then the inevitable barriers that teachers will bring to you, or even other educators that maybe aren't teachers will bring to you, hey, we have these problems. We have bell schedules. We have four walls in a classroom and desks that are attached and so on and so forth. And so it became my responsibility as a school leader to, and my team kind of refer to me as a bulldozer. It was my responsibility to bulldoze those barriers out of the way. Even if I didn't have an answer that I could give my team, I had to be able to say, you know what, we're not going to worry about this barrier right now. I'll worry about this in the future. And so by removing those barriers reflective of time and place and students who are scheduled to be with this teacher at this time, we were able to make some pretty significant transformations. Our teachers have the ability to flex their time now. The amount of time that they spend with kids. We're starting to see a significant more blending of curriculums, social studies being used to enhance language arts instruction, math being used to enhance science and vice versa. And then we also really started to take a look at how student interests and aptitudes kind of play out into the opportunities that they are given, especially when you're looking at kind of larger collaborative projects. Those things start to have more of a precedent in what kids are doing in terms of the way in which they show their learning. And I'll jump over to that transformational piece real quick. Our school, we have had hiccups along the way, but one of the coolest things to see over our journey has been the organic growth of PCBL within our school. And so we started with just a small handful of teachers, a research team, a school within a school approach. And, we had this glorious 5-year plan as to how we were going to kind of slow roll this work. And what we really started is, especially in the second year of implementation, as teachers find success and collaborate with other teachers who maybe are in the same content but weren't necessarily as part of the academy model, that collaboration started to transform what those teachers were doing in their classrooms as well. And so we started to see significant organic growth with this work across all 4 of our grade levels. And so, that has been, something that's been super exciting to see. It completely blew up our 5-year plan. The other 3 attributes, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all 5 of these with examples. You can see some of the examples that I have here. We really had to advocate, not just myself as the building leader, but teachers had to advocate, for this work and the importance of this work with our Board of Education, with our, outside with our community. And so those types of pieces are extremely important. So it doesn't really matter what role you have. And that was one of the reasons why we asked you where you're from and what your role is. Because if you're a classroom teacher, you can advocate and you can be a leader within your classroom and with your colleagues in this work. If you're a school leader, you can advocate for this work. You can be a leader with this work. If you're a district leader, so on and so forth, and it goes all the way up. And so I'm going to close, move on to Casey, because I've already used up my 3 to 5 minutes. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what your role is. We are all leaders within this work of educating our students.
Mm-hmm. And definitely, I want to piggyback on Bob for a second, because from my perspective, I want to talk through is the district level, and it takes leaders at the building level like Bob, but he hit the money. It goes back to teacher leaders. And so I want to really talk about the human-centered as well, only because that's probably where I found the most impactful piece is reminding myself, as much as I wanted the district to have some alignment, I needed to meet people where they were. And so that slow to fast was one thing. And so our journey actually was very similar to Bob's school. And as a district, we were blessed that our state organized a personalized learning group at the state level, and they were actually created the Portrait of a Graduate for the state. And so that work began us thinking about the work we were already doing through STEAM and even some project-based and just good teaching, meeting kids where they were, personalizing it. So that work continued, and we began to unpack standards as a district, and then thinking about, and I know we've all said that, but looking at those pre-assessments, how are we making a kid sit through the seat time just because? And so I will tell you, I was very blessed that my elementary friends were the first to begin this work. So my secondary friends was where my human-centered attribute really stretched me, because, you know, they believe everything's important and everybody needs to hear from the perspective and the pieces of information. And so finding value in that collectiveness, making sure everybody was ready. So when I talked through there and look, so we decided as a district, it actually was right after the pandemic. We were a place where we continued 5 days a week. So it was a lot to ask, but we started with year one to find balance, even at our secondary schools, to meet everybody where they were with the word agency. And I think that's where the human centerpiece comes into play, is that first having teachers reflect on, how do I like to access information? How do I like to engage and express? And then having them ask that of their students. And my secondary friends, that was the key turning point, because they had never asked kids, how do you like to access information? How do you like to engage? How do you like to express? Because many of my secondary friends were, here's your assessment, this is what I need from you. And so that kind of led right into that the ownership. And so when I think about that, now, am I here to say that I had everybody in a building? No, but year one, the one thing as a district, everybody from our custodian to our cafeteria to our receptionist to our parents knew about the word agency and knew about strengths and challenges. So that profile piece was in play. I had teachers in pockets. We didn't do a school within a school, but ultimately we took the willing and continued with those baseline district level. And you can see here, here's our 5-year plan. And we just continue to take steps by steps. And I had some people that were running with it. I had some schools that were already close to year 4 at year 1. And I will say, as a district leader, that's one thing of that human-centered, but also the one attribute that really resonates with me is that collaborative, because that's where I reminded myself where everybody was. I actually used a tracking sheet to kind of capture and goal keep, and just make sure that everybody knew where everybody's journey was, from the board to, again, just allowing them to see other people, taking them on school to school visits. We do some showcases, but reminding them that it's a collective piece. It's not just an island of yourself, and reminding them to see. And so you'll notice as we went through this journey, the big piece was that shared decision-making and looking through, and that this was our goal. As you might have noticed, our 5-year goal was, we wanted our seniors to walk out the door with that business card that told their story, told their agency, told their attributes, what they could offer, ultimately capturing those 3 big leaps from our graduate at the state level, knowing myself as a learner, what was my journey like, what do I have, and then making sure that I capture the fact of that I do have ownership in mind. How have I impacted others? Looking at some of those integration, the competency piece was something that took us multiple years. So as I think through this collaborative piece, the one thing that really resonates is it came to nurturing leadership. I wish everybody was a Bob, but if you're anywhere at a district level, you'll realize that you're going to have some Bobs, you're going to have some friends that just aren't comfortable yet, and you're going to have some friends that are ready to kind of get their toes wet. And so meeting them where they are and allowing that culture to explore, see, guide them. There was plenty of late nights sitting down with schools. And then also reminding them they don't have to be like a neighboring school. Now, the one thing I will say from a district level that I try to is help make sure they saw the feeding pattern. And so when I think about this collective, that shared goal and action plan, that was the one thing, is allowing them to sit down together. So even though we're not there yet, to see it in action. And so I will say my journey at a district level was an opportunity for us to kind of ensure those voices from all angles. And the one thing I think was essential was bringing in the actual community. And that would be CFOs, CEOs. We brought in parents, we brought in business to kind of get their perspectives and kind of making sure that we were balanced, because we felt that if we didn't have the outside noise and the outside environment understanding the work, then when you didn't see an A on a paper, we need to make sure that we have an understanding of where our journey's going and how we're fostering learning for students. So those are two attributes, but I agree with Bob. When we created this portrait, it was one of those things that all 5 of these resonated. But I do think the human-centered was the one that kind of just kept balanced, especially thinking about the last decade. But that transformational work, as Bob, it is a North Star for us. It is the one that keeps us striving, but just making sure that we're working together on this journey. So I'm going to pass it off to Estrada.
Thanks, Casey. And so I just wanted to leave you with how I actually applied this recently. So I'm in Mesa Public Schools. We're in the Arizona Personalized Learning Network. I know I see friends from Santa Cruz Valley, Tucson, and Yuma that are also part of the network on the call. But something I was able to do recently here in Mesa Public Schools was, how am I going to help lead out transformation within our school district? And if you don't know, it's the largest school district in Arizona, serve over 55,000 students. So how are we going to lead out transformation and scale out PCBL work? And so what we did was we brought in all of our site-based instructional coaches and really workshop the Portrait of a Leader with them. As Bob mentioned, all of our individuals that are advocating and leading towards PCBL efforts, all of them are leaders. We created the Portrait of a Leader outside of positional leadership. And when I brought our site-based coaches together, they at first asked me, why are we looking at the Portrait of a Leader? I'm not a school leader. And so having to just do some change management, transformational work with them, how they saw themselves and how they lead out work. And how I did that was, if you click on the next one, really used the attribute of advocate and had them share out, how do they advocate for the learners on their campus? How do they advocate for teacher support and what teachers need from the instructional coach position? And so I got them to see how they are champions for their campus and their community of learners and their community of educators. And so we went through and discussed and developed next steps through working with the Portrait of a Leader with how they could lead out this work. And one thing we are grounded in Mesa Public Schools, aside from our Mesa Promise, is our instructional framework. And so I dropped that link so you can look at it if you'd like. But knowing that within our instructional framework, we're hoping our coaches, or asking our coaches to coach to get towards agency. Agency's at the center of our framework. And so as we looked at the Portrait of a Leader, we know we're getting to agency in our instructional framework. I asked, how can we coach into that? How can you advocate for that? As you go into classrooms and we look at what this means to be a champion for structures, equitable structures, how are we getting to the agency in our rooms? And so I was really able to apply the Portrait of a Leader, its attributes, to this specific group, and I've done it with other groups to share that everyone's a leader and we all have our role into stepping into this work. So that's just how I've done it recently at our school district, with the hopes of getting to agency for over 55,000 students.
And so I hope that kind of just gave you a couple perspectives on how we've used some of those attributes in our everyday and driving. So we want to give you the chance to kind of talk with some people on the call and kind of reflect on, how do these attributes, connect with your role? Is there one that kind of stands out? So just a few little clarifying pieces. is that we're gonna drop you into some breakout rooms. Just kind of go around. You can introduce yourself, of course, if you didn't catch everybody who, because their face. And then pick one of the attributes, which one really resonates. And if you can balance out to one, that's great, and kind of talk about it from the role, because you're going to realize it was, as we even worked through, the three of us and our team of 12, we talked about those different elements. And I appreciate Estrada talking about, it is true. Lots of people don't see themselves as leaders, but everybody down to students are leaders. And everybody has those different components of the attributes. So picking that, discussing, we'll also drop access to the portrait. So in case you don't have that up as well. And so I'm going to ask Simone, if you don't mind, to break up friends into breakout rooms. And then just when we come back, we're going to share what attribute you picked. So if you don't mind.
Thank
So Laura, tell us about your room. What was the big takeaway when you were connecting with attributes?
Oh, I just put myself out there, didn't I?
Yeah.
We shared a lot. We had what was the big takeaway? Well, we all had different attributes. Emily and I really were talking about nourishing the authentic piece and really thinking about our vulnerability and how we are working on our inner selves. We had others thinking about those bigger pieces in the system and how they want to change their leadership approach in order to, advocate for their system, for their school. And we had one other share about advocacy and how that's really become a central piece. And I would argue that given where we are in the world, that one's going to become more and more and more and more and more and more and more important.
Mhm.
So I'm very curious about that one. I find for me that one is going to be one where I'm going to have a lot of ahas.
And I think, Laura, I would agree with you. We talked about that one last time we were together, but in general, that is something that's within all leaders as well. So even down to the teacher level. So just reminding them that voice, kind of those other pieces. Did anybody from the room we were in want to share any ahas? All right, well, I will share for Derek. Is that you? I saw that, Derek. All right, go for it, buddy.
Yeah, I didn't want to, I guess it was my aha, but we talked about the value of being human-centered, and the more you care about people, the more that you show that their work is valued in whatever capacity you can do that, the more likely it is that they're going to work hard for the district, for their kids in their classroom. The more likely it is that they're going to try to own, if you're a teacher, you're going to own your four walls, unless you have a weird shaped room. But I think that, they all align. The five attributes they're all connected. And I think as a leader, whether you're a district leader, campus leader, you're always looking to transform, and it's baby steps along the way. And you have to be collaborative. If you're trying to do things top down, it's very, very difficult. And that's education. It takes time, because you have to bring people together, and you have to have some really valuable conversations and discussions and professional development and all those things. So.
And Derek brought up a good point. You're going to have some naysayers. He was like, he called them eye rollers. You're going to have some of those people that aren't believers yet. But I think even Bob talked about that. You got to allow the ones that are ready to move, and they're going to find their way, because it's going to be noticeable. Because the great thing we have in our pocket is kids, and kids will tell the story better than us. And so they're movers. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob, because I do think you're going to be excited about our next phase and what's coming.
So go ahead and move. There you go. That slide right there. So this is very exciting, some very exciting stuff. And Simone, I apologize in advance, because I'm sure I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder. But there's a lot of super exciting stuff that's going to be happening, and it's going to all be rolling out very quickly. First and foremost, not on this slide, but one of the things that I would like to mention is that there are going to be a significant number of openings for the steering committee moving forward. This committee has been kind of set up and designed so that there's kind of a rolling membership through it so that we can also continue to develop leaders within this work. And so many of us who started at the very beginning, we're going to be transitioning off of the steering committee, focusing our work on some of the working groups that get, some of the nut and bolts tasks for the network happening. And so if you are interested, and it feels like the fact that you're here and you wanted to know more about this, that you are probably well equipped to join the steering committee moving forward. If that's not for you, we've got working groups that the network is done. All of this work it happens collaboratively with the support of KnowledgeWorks and KnowledgeWorks staff, but ultimately the work gets done by each and every one of us who are just educators out in the field, either at the central office level, state board level, school level, or classroom level. And so there's a place for everybody to be part of the network. The network is going to be changing a little bit. Its platform, I know Simone's going to talk about that. So that's super exciting. She's going to mention. But the second phase of this work is to develop specific competencies. And those competencies are then going to roll into rubrics to allow us to be able to self-assess where we are at within those attributes. And then also ultimately to continue the work of research and prototype development so that we have the ability as a network to really kind of create a whole-scale, holistic approach to leadership development around personalized competency-based learning. But if you look at those attributes, you could take those attributes and apply them to almost nearly any situation that requires leadership. And so super exciting stuff that's coming down the pike. Stay tuned and don't forget to join the network if you haven't already done so.
Great, thanks, Bob. Yeah, before we wrap up, we have a few minutes. Were there any questions that come about or share outs that anyone had in mind? Leave some space for questions. All right. If not, yeah, so as Bob mentioned, as part of this network, we also have an online community of our educators. You can connect, collaborate, share resources. We have virtual events each month. We have our resource, a hub of resources that can be valuable to your learning community. All right. So yeah, as I mentioned, we have our online network. If you are interested in joining, we had our QR code there, but you can also learn more on leadforlearners.org/share. We also speaking of resources and opportunities, we have you can learn more in depth of our Portrait of a Leader resources that we have within our online community. And you can learn more about the attributes that we talked about today. We also have an Emerging Leaders cohort. Casey, if you go to the next slide. This is the Emerging Leaders program. It's a 12-month leadership development cohort focused on cultivating the skills that we talked about today that are defined in the Portrait of a Leader. So if you would also like to learn more about that, you can scan that QR code, but we also, again, everything is all on our website, leadforlearners.org. Thanks, Casey. And these are some upcoming meetups we have. We have some summertime coffee chats, just some open, non-informal talks. If you just want to connect with fellow members, please join us. It'll be facilitated by Ian McDougall, our educator from Arizona as well. And you'll all get a free Lead for Learners mug, all who joins. And here's a link to our feedback form. You can go to tinyurl.com/L4L meet, or you can scan this QR code and just let us know how we did today. All right. Casey, Estrada, Bob, any final words before we wrap up?
Just a reminder that any posting that you put on our network, we can help guide. So ask those questions as mentioned earlier. Any scenarios, situations, or just thinking about like, hey, and that's probably the biggest thing about our network is Bob and I will sit and hash back what's going on at, the school level, the district level, thinking through different perspectives. So utilize our network. There's a chat session in there that you can ask questions. So let us help you in any way we can.